see it's Thursday, June the 13th. Good old 13. We've got a very sort of significant change in the dialogue from the White House regarding Syria. President Obama coming out stating that the Syrian government has crossed the red line. They are now releasing this information to the public. They're not trying to distract anybody from anything. I'm sure that it's just coincidental. They're releasing this information that they have concluded that Syria has used chemical weapons on its own people, right? The civil war that is occurring right there. And as a result, the war hawks are out. The three amigos there, John McCain, Lindsey Graham. I didn't see Lieberman yet, but maybe he'll come on tomorrow. Are calling for a major escalation in the U.S. involvement in the situation in the civil war that's happening in Syria. I think what you're seeing is much what we saw with Libya, and this is how they build it up step by step. Let's give a listen into CNN here and see how they are reporting this. The CIA wing of the White House.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We begin with breaking news. Congress has been notified that the United States will acknowledge Syria has used chemical weapons multiple times. That's been the red line for the Obama administration, and that red line has now apparently been crossed.
There's a lot of red there, eh? Check this out. Right? Just saying.
Let's go straight now to CNN Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr. Barbara, what's developing?
Brianna, this story has been brewing behind the scenes in Washington all day now. At this hour, White House officials briefing reporters are about to tell them that the red line has been crossed, that the U.S. intelligence community has determined the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons multiple times in small amounts. This all dates back to at least 2 incidents in March when it is believed small amounts, relatively small, of sarin were used against civilian populations in Syria. This puts the president in a very difficult position because it has been his position that when the red line is crossed, he will have to do something to act to help the rebels, to help the people of Syria. We do not expect the White House to announce a next step, but Congress certainly getting more concerned about all of this. The ranking Republican member of the Senate Intelligence Committee talking about it a short time ago.
We now know that chemical weapons have been used for almost a year by the Syrian regime. We've done nothing. So I think it's time that we act in a very serious way. If a no-fly zone is what they decided to do, then I'm sure our military has taken the right preparations for carrying out a successful operation, and I'll support that.
And Barbara Starr, we're going to have you stand by there at the Pentagon. Let's go straight to the Senate floor where Senator John McCain is talking about this.
So I applaud the president's decision. I applaud the fact that he has now acknowledged what the French and others and all the rest of us knew, that Bashar Assad is using chemical weapons. But just to provide additional weapons to the Syrian National Army is not enough. We've got to change the equation on the battleground. And if I might say, I have seen and been in conflicts where there was gradual escalation. They don't win. If all we're going to do is supply weapons, then there will be a commensurate resupply by the Iranians and the Russians and others. So I thank the president for acknowledging that the Syrians are using chemical weapons and massacring their own people, and I applaud his decision to provide additional weapons. I do not, every ounce, every bone in my body knows that simply providing weapons will not change the battlefield equation, and we must change the battlefield equation. Otherwise, you are going to see a regional conflict, the consequences of which we will be paying for a long, long time. And I yield to my colleague from South Carolina.
Well, thank you. I would like to add my voice to the president's decision to act, because I think action by the United States and the international community is required. What does it matter to the average American that we contain this war in Syria and that it ends sooner rather than later? The chemical weapons that now have been acknowledged to be used by Assad against his own people, my goal is to make sure they're not used against us or Israel or our allies throughout the world. And if we don't stop this war, the chemical weapons caches that number in the hundreds of thousands of weapons that could be used, could be deployed, that could kill thousands of Americans or Israelis or people that are aligned with us. So really the president's decision to intervene comes from an escalation of the use of chemical weapons by Assad. As Senator McCain has indicated, the threats to our country are not just from the chemical weapons.
Let's get now to our chief congressional correspondent, Dana.
Wait a second. They cut him off right when he's given his WMD speech. I mean, seriously, right? This is the same language they used when they were talking about Iraq. Same thing when they said Libya as well. Same thing with Afghanistan. Well, maybe on a different level, but nonetheless, it's once again weapons that can be used against Americans. I mean, is anybody stupid enough to think that some chemical weapon that's in Syria is going to end up being used in Wisconsin or something? Are you fucking kidding? So they're trying to sell you the war before it happens. They're trying to tell you, Assad's a bad dude, right? He's doing terrible things to his own people. Never mind that your own president is spying on you, using all these agencies and covert organizations to completely destroy democracy and have a police state. Never mind that he's guilty on so many different things, and Benghazi, to the Associated Press being monitored, to the phones being tapped, to the NSA surveillance, to frickin' IRS. Oh, there's a war in Syria. CNN's getting on it. It's cross the red line. The red line. Always language is hugely important. The way he's even wearing a red tie. I pointed out the CNN girl wearing the striking red sort of dress that she has on. And this is how they get it through your mind. They send these images of Syria little by little, week by week, building it up until it gets to the point where they've crossed the red line, which means now the U.S. is going to get involved. I mean, they're completely involved already, but they're going to escalate their involvement. So, let's hear more.
Bash, he's there on Capitol Hill watching what we just saw, Dana, Senator John McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham. What is the congressional reaction to this news that the U.S. government is acknowledging that Syria used chemical weapons against rebels?
Well, you just heard it real time, Brianna. The senator from Arizona, Senator McCain, and Senator Lindsey Graham, two of the most hawkish senators when it comes to Syria, waited about a nanosecond between this becoming public and going to the Senate floor and saying that this is just the latest example from their perspective of why the president, why the administration has to be much more aggressive when it comes to helping the Syrian rebels and getting more involved in this conflict and not doing it piecemeal, as Senator McCain was just saying. And I should just update you, as we're talking, as we're learning this information, our chief White House correspondent, Jessica Yellen, is getting information as well. And she's reporting that a senior intelligence official is saying that the weapons, the chemical weapons used on a small scale is sarin gas in Syria, and that this intelligence official says 100 to 150 people have died as a result of this gas. So this is more information we're getting on the disclosure of how much of these chemical weapons were used, and of course the deadly impact of the chemical weapons.
Dana, stand by for us. We're going to go to the Pentagon now, back to Barbara Starr. Barbara, tell us, what are you hearing there? I know we had to cut out from you a little earlier to get some reaction there, quick reaction from Congress. What else are you hearing? And also, if you could sort of talk a little bit more about some of these new details that we're just getting in here to the Situation Room about how many people may have died because of the use of chemical weapons.
Well, Brianna, these two incidents back in March in which sarin gas was suspected to have been used have been looked at by the intelligence community in Washington and intelligence services around the world for the last many months, trying to determine what happened. We now know that they feel very comfortable saying that sarin was used. But I think one of the real bottom lines here for the president and for the United States and Congress is, besides the humanitarian disaster, as bad as that is, why is this all so important? You heard one of the senators there talking about the concern that these chemical weapons, as Syria implodes, becomes more disorganized, could the chemical weapons wind up in the hands of al-Qaeda and become a terrorist threat? There is a much deeper, believe it or not, concern as well. Iran. In the last several weeks, Iran has considerably stepped up its power, influence, and operations inside Syria. We talked to people today who tell us there are at least 3 Iranian militia training camps inside of Syria, perhaps thousands of Iranian and Hezbollah fighters. Why is that so key? As Iran extends its influence and looks for more power, more influence in the region, there are economic concerns. This could embolden Iran. Many people worry in regards to the Persian Gulf oil shipping lanes, could make Iran much more bold, Brianna. That begins to affect the world economy. Brianna?
Barbara Starr at the Pentagon. Let's go back now and
let's talk about Barbara for a second. She reminds me of the they live aliens, you know. But you could rip her face off and she'd have some alien face behind her. You can't trust a woman that's been in a Pentagon for a good 20 years, and you can't trust a network that is staffed with FBI and CIA verified. You know, it is this message that's coming across right now is it's the bigger picture with what is going on in U.S. geopolitics. Is the U.S. foreign policy is going to somehow try to enter into a major conflict in the Middle East again here. And this is so much for the benefit of Israel, obviously. We have a very heavily Jew oriented station here, CNN, Wolf Blitzer, for instance. Dana Bash, I don't know. Her husband, John King, actually converted to Judaism when he married her. You know, sometimes it has to be pointed out. It has to be pointed out. I live in a very Jewish area of Montreal, and I don't have a problem with most Jews. But I have a problem with Zionist Jews. I have a problem with the Jewish IPAC, you know, the whole power center, the Three Amigos, of course, Joe Lieberman. So many powerful Jews within the United States Pentagon, within the White House. It's a dangerous thing. It's a dangerous thing because Israel is, you know, in the most contentious part of the world right now and is constantly at war with its neighbors. And the Americans are constantly being dragged into this. Now, part of it is the Israeli influence, and there's many other factors to it. There's the military-industrial complex, which generates incredible profits from engaging in wars. Iraq is the perfect example. There's trillions, I would imagine, to be made, billions upon billions, hundreds of billions to be made for oil industry, for security industries like Blackwater, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, right? So there's always that interest. There's the huge oil interest. That's really the underlying whole reason why anybody cares about what's going on in Syria. Look, these kind of things that's happening in Syria, is there chemical weapons? Has Assad used chemical weapons on his people? We don't know. I mean, are we really going to know for sure? Are we really going to trust these people who told us that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and that Iraq would somehow pose a major threat to American security, halfway around the world, pop gun arsenal, and it's going to somehow, terrorize, or it's a good word for it, Americans in small town America kind of thing, because that's what they sold it to. They're selling it to the people. And this has been long in the making. The whole, it's very complex. We have covered so much on this channel about Iran, Iraq, the pipelines, Afghanistan, all these, the oil, of course, being the major reason. I mean, if there was no oil, you wouldn't hear about any of these places. Now, Syria is really perhaps best put as the stepping stone to Iran. Syria and Iran have a very close relationship, which is getting closer all the time, because obviously they feel the pressure from, the New World Order, and it is getting to them, right? It's getting to the point now. Syria is in a major civil war. There is so much going on there, a lot of people dying. It is an awful situation. There's no doubt that the U.S. is hugely involved in that. There's no doubt that the U.S., and it's not just the U.S., let's say the U.S. and Israel, Anglo-American Israeli sort of alliance that has so much strategic interest in that area. And Iran really is where it's going to end up. So that is why they're bringing Iran directly into it. And yes, it's true. Syria and Iran do have a very close relationship, but that is how nations are. I mean, if somehow you are on the hit list, you're going to be looking for friends, right? And there has been a major power struggle. I mean, there's been a power struggle throughout the history of the world. And that region particularly, I mean, you go back to Sumerian times, you go back even beyond that, it's always been wars. There's always been fights, and that's long before they discovered oil there, right? It's just populations there. It's resources. But this is a much bigger deal, and it has a lot to do with the, desire to control the oil of the Middle East. The desire to not allow that sphere, that Middle Eastern sphere, to fall under Russian or Chinese dominance, right? So this is a long-term plan. To go in there, they have to have the pretext ready. They have to have it packaged for mainstream media so the people will pay for it. So let's see a little bit more about this CNN here.
Listen to something President Obama said about Syria and exactly what would be a red line in terms of use of chemical weapons. This is what he said back in August.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
Now, it does appear that this has evolved here over the last couple of months. Let's bring in Dana Bash, our chief congressional correspondent there on Capitol Hill, where reaction is just starting to come in. Dana, we had a sense, obviously, a couple of months ago when it appeared that a red line may have been crossed, and the administration was very careful about describing exactly what had happened. Clearly wanted to have the time to be able to calculate a response to this. But talk a little bit about what you're hearing there on Capitol Hill. We just heard from Senators John McCain and Senator Lindsey Graham. How much impact do you think what they're calling for, which is essentially more than what the administration is doing, how much impact is that going to have on what President Obama may ultimately do?
I think that the impact is going to be the news of this information. Now, obviously, it probably should go without saying that there is skepticism, widespread skepticism, and it certainly is included here on Capitol Hill since what happened with the Iraq War, when Americans were told that there were chemical weapons, and it turned out not to be true, about going into a conflict that the United States is not directly involved in because of any kind of chemical weapons or weapons of mass destruction. Having said that, we just went back and looked at a poll that was done just last month asking this question, whether or not U.S. military action would be justified if, in fact, the Syrian government used chemical weapons in its country. 66% said yes. So that should give supporters of more action, based on this news, a lot of support from the American people, if this poll is to be believed. Having said that, I will just tell you that this has already been a debate here on Capitol Hill between those who are much more hawkish, like ones we saw on the floor, Senators McCain and Graham, and those who are really, really reluctant and know that there is a lot of fatigue out there for the U.S. getting involved in any more conflicts.
Dana Bash for us there on Capitol Hill. We'll be heading to the White House in just a moment. But first, watch what Senator John McCain said on the Senate floor just moments ago.
The President also will announce that we will be assisting the Syrian rebels in Syria by providing them with weapons and other assistance. I applaud the President.
So that was Senator John McCain as we head to the White House to talk to our chief White House correspondent, Jessica Yellen. Jessica, we heard Senator McCain saying on the floor there he's calling for more than what the administration is doing. But we've seen this sort of back and forth before as the situation has evolved in recent months. The White House has taken a much more cautious approach, certainly than Senators McCain and Graham are calling for.
Absolutely, as you well know, Brianna, and yet this is the game changer. The president has said his red line will be crossed if they find evidence that chemical weapons have been used. And the White House is about to announce, I'm on hold for a conference call in which they're going to do it, that they have evidence that chemical weapons were indeed used. And so that changes the calculus from here. The next question, as you've been discussing, is what does the White House do? And, there are three options. There's this option of a no-fly zone, and I'll tell you that realistically, there's not an expectation that the president is backing that at this point. There's the possibility that there could be some very serious heavy weaponry put into the effort to back rebels there, that the U.S. would really get behind surface-to-air missiles and bolster that the rebels in that way. That is unlikely. Informed experts believe will happen, if anything now, is some form of supporting the rebels either through arming them, training them, or enhanced intelligence engagement in the country. And obviously, by that I mean sending more CIA operatives into the country, more intel support. And the president clearly is not going to come out and announce that. That's just something that would happen if it does happen. So I don't expect you to see the White House coming out and making an announcement to say, we're going to do covert operations there. So what we do expect is for the White House to announce this chemical weapons discovery, and perhaps that's all for today, and we'll learn more about next steps in the coming days and weeks. Brianna.
And Jessica, we're hearing from Senator McCain. He's talking about how, from his perspective, that he knows as fact that the administration will be arming the rebels. You talked about, obviously, a lot of other type of aid that has already been provided to the rebels. Do you think this may be something that we could hear coming up in this information that we're expecting to get any moment now from the administration?
Yes, it's possible. And there's there's different interpretations of what arming the rebels means and to what extent. The big questions will be how much, in what ways, and is it going to be enough to satisfy John McCain? It may be that Senator McCain has one notion of what arming the rebels means, and the White House might be doing it in a different way. Keep in mind, the president is going overseas to meet with European leaders, the G8, in just a few days, where he has to come in and will face enormous pressure to talk about Syria, have a public position on it. And that might be also a motivating factor to come out with this information before he goes to Europe to meet with them.
And I think we're getting a preview, certainly, of what Senator McCain thinks as he's on the Senate floor there, calling for even more just moments ago. Jessica Yellen for us there at the White House. Thank you for that.
Jessica Yellen. She's yelling. She's yelling. You got Dana Bash, Lindsey Graham, the cheerleaders. Well, I have to say, though, at least Dana Bash there did come out and kind of critique or at least point out the Warhawks and say that it was unlikely that they were going to do this or that. But let's be honest, this is a build-up. This was a plan for a long, long time. Syria was one of the countries that was marked, right? It was marked a long time. It was marked by George W. Bush, right? But it was marked even before that. And it was one of these countries one of the dominoes that was going to fall. One of the New World Order dominoes. The big one being Iran. But Syria is very close to Iran right now. Has been since, I believe, 79, since the Ayatollah Khomeini and the revolution. And Iran is known to have supported Hezbollah, of course, for many years. The Israeli influence on this whole thing cannot be discounted. That's why I pointed out before, right? I pointed out before to show that when you have the Jews coming out and talking about Syria, and then Iran, that is the language to get Americans thinking that we need to go in there. And that's what's going to happen. That is going to happen. I think you're very likely to see some sort of major involvement in Syria coming soon. And this is what the language is. I mean, the language was similar before the build up to Iraq. And one thing, though, that they were able to point out here, and I'll give them a bit of credit for that, is that people have a really bad taste in their mouth, Americans especially. The war in Iraq, they really don't like the fact that there was no weapons of mass destruction. And they remember how they were lied to about that. And, fool me once, fool can't be a fool, or whatever Bush said there when he messed it up. You have to think that enough Americans are going to say, wait a second, we might not believe what you're saying about this chemical weapons. Where will they escalate it from here? Where will it go? It's eventually going to lead to Iran, right? It's going to lead to Iran. It's going to lead there, because these are the countries that need to fall under the New World Order, basically, right? These countries are the last countries that are left that don't have the Rothschild banks in them, that don't have the puppet governments running, getting supplied by Americans, the bases, right? The strategic bases. And that is how it is. Really, what it comes down to is it's a big risk game, right? And the Rockefellers and Kissingers are rolling the dice, and Putin's across the board, and then the Chinese are on the other board, right? And they're going to duke it out one way or another for the Middle East, the oil of the Middle East, right? And this is how it is going. So the Americans are telling us that they are going to go into Syria very soon. Be warned. Leave your comments below.